How can we maintain of Nietzsche that his whole life's work was a continuous polemic against Marxism and socialism, when it is perfectly clear that he never read a single line of Marx and Engels? Unhappy the age in which the slave needs such ideas and is spurred to reflect upon himself and the world around him. Wretched the seducers who have deprived the slave of his innocence by means of the fruit from the tree of knowledge. Lukács was a Marxist philosopher who wrote the book The Destruction of Reason. In this book, he criticizes German philosophy after Marx and the role it played in the rise of National Socialism. The third chapter is dedicated to Nietzsche and is called Nietzsche as Founder of Irrationalism in the Imperialist Period.
Are you going to...
No. I'm just giving a summary of a Marxist analysis on Nietzsche.
Good.
I know how much you love your German philosophy.
Anyway.
The intellectual orientation around the time of both Marx and Nietzsche was the critical recognition of history as the site of an unfolding drama in which humankind must play an active role. The historicity of man. While Marx optimistically laid out the new possibilities and problems of history founded on a dialectical understanding, Nietzsche not only lacked a dialectical understanding of capitalism, but for Lukács, his philosophy highlighted the contradictory nature of bourgeois society in crisis. For Nietzsche then, the mission was one of self-conquest. His philosophy performed the social task of rescuing and redeeming this type of bourgeois mind. It offered a road which avoided the need for any break or indeed any serious conflict with the bourgeoisie. It was a road whereby the pleasant moral feeling of being a rebel could be sustained and even intensified, whilst the more thorough, cosmic biological revolution was enticingly projected in contrast to the superficial and external social revolution. Revolution, that is, which would fully preserve the bourgeoisie's privileges and would passionately defend the privileged existence of the parasitical and imperialist intelligentsia first and foremost. A revolution directing against the masses and lending an expression compounded of pathos and aggressiveness to the veiled egotistic fears of the economically and culturally privileged. This reflected in him being mostly concerned with cultural problems, notably art and individual morality. Politics always appeared as though on an abstract, mythologized horizon, along with an ignorance of economics, and therefore solely capable of observing, describing, and expressing the symptoms of the superstructure. Writing in the wake of the workers' revolts in 1848 that led Marx and Engels to pen the Communist Manifesto, Nietzsche saw in the socialist movements of this time the pretension of terrestrial happiness for everyone, which more and more characterized the modern world. His mission reflected this desire to cure Europe of the madness of egalitarianism. While Adam Smith's basic economic tenet that the individual's economically self-seeking actions are the mainspring of the productive force's development, leading necessarily, in the last resort, to a harmonizing of the collective interests of society, he was, on the contrary, idealizing those egotistic tendencies in the declining bourgeoisie that were burgeoning in his own lifetime and became truly, universally prevalent in the imperialistic period. It was the egotism of a class which, having been condemned by history to its doom, was mobilizing all mankind's barbaric instincts in its desperate struggles with its gravediggers the proletariat. As he wrote in Zarathustra, nothing is true, everything is permitted. I deprived you of everything, a god, a duty. Now you must provide the greatest proof of a noble action. Behold, a contest for dominance, with the herd still more a herd in the end, and the tyrant still more a tyrant. No secret society. The consequences of your doctrine must wreak fearful havoc, but countless are destined to perish from them. We are submitting truth to an experiment. Maybe mankind will perish in the process, so be it. The drive towards egalitarianism was a moral problem for Nietzsche. It led to a society in which resentment and pity were elevated as being virtuous. More importantly, though, was how revolutionaries aimed to disrupt the ordering of society, specifically slave hierarchies that Nietzsche saw as necessary features of any social order. A society of rank ordering what was necessary, because only in such a society would leisure time for the wealthy be properly distributed. To accomplish this upheaval, this transvaluation of all values, new men were needed. Nietzsche intended his ethics to affect their selection, education, and breeding, but this called for a liberation of the instincts above all else. In Nietzsche's opinion, each previous religion, philosophy, morality, and so forth had the function of opposing a liberation of the instincts, a suppressing, neglecting, and perverting of them. Only with his own ethics did the liberating process commence, for the Übermensch and the free spirits. As Lukács writes, for Nietzsche, all his contents stem from the fear which sought refuge in myth of the fall of his own class, and from an inability, genuinely, to measure up to the adversary in intellectual terms. The epistemological appeal to adopt the most extreme irrationalism, to deny completely all knowability of the world and all reason, coupled with a moral appeal to all the bestial and barbaric instincts, is an unconscious admission of this position. Nietzsche's uncommon gift is manifest in his ability to project, on the threshold of the Imperialist Period, a countermyth that could exert such influence for decades. Viewed in this light, his aphoristic mode of expression appears the form adequate to the socio-historical situations. The inner rottenness, hollowness, and mendacity of the whole system wrapped itself in this motely and formally disconnected ragbag of ideas. According to Lukács, what Nietzsche provided was a morality for the socially militant bourgeoisie and middle-class intelligentsia of imperialism. He ties this into what Engels says about lawyers. The reflecting of economic conditions and legal principles operates without impinging on the awareness of the agents, and the lawyer imagines that he is operating with a priori thesis, whereas they are simply economic reflexes. Hence, each ideology is consciously attached to a specific intellectual fabric which has been transmitted by its predecessors. Nietzsche was situated between this Jekyll and Hyde character of his class in three ways. Number one, it is always a sign of the bourgeois in crisis when there is an oscillation between the most acute feeling for nuance, the keenest oversensitivity, and a sudden eruption of brutality. Second, it is very closely linked with a deep dissatisfaction concerning contemporary culture, an unease about culture in Freud's terms. Under no circumstances, however, would the rebel stomach any interference with his own privileges and the basis in society. 3. It was just at the time of Nietzsche's activity that the class began to decline, and the decadent tendencies reached such a pitch that their subjective evaluation within the bourgeois class underwent a significant change. For a long while, only the progressive opposition critics had been exposing and condemning the symptoms of decadence, whereas the vast majority of the bourgeois intelligentsia clung to the illusion of living in the best of all worlds. Now, however, an insight into their own decadence was becoming more and more the hub of their self-knowledge. This change manifested itself above all in a complacent, narcissistic, playful relativism, along with pessimism and nihilism. But in the case of the honest intellectuals, these often turned into sincere despair and a consequent mood of revolt, which turned into messianism. According to Lukács, then, Nietzsche resonated strongly with what the intelligentsia at the time would need in the imperialist age, or would inwardly move and disturb them, but at the same time appease them the most. Hence, Nietzsche's dialectics in this respect lay in a simultaneous acceptance and rejection of the decadent movement, whereby he could enable the militant reactionaries to reap the benefits. For his own part, Nietzsche gave his blessings to these dialectics when he says, "For granted, I am a decadent. I am also the antithesis."
Yes!
Okay, yeesh. Lukács provides a Marxist analysis of his reactionary sentiments. This video is not an ode to abandon Nietzsche to the right, though. In 2020, Professor Matthew McManus, who we've done a video with, wrote an article called "On Left and Right Nietzscheanism." In the article, he elaborated on how in The Genealogy of Morals, Twilight of the Idols, and The Antichrist, Nietzsche tries to show that many traditions have been glamorized by a false universality and naturalness. Left Nietzscheans appropriated these dimensions of his philosophy to undermine the more authoritarian and socially conservative traditions of Western states, arguing that when right-wingers rail against declining sexual standards or a loss of shared tradition, they aren't speaking in the name of anything objectively true, but at best, reflecting the prejudices of the mediocre, often backed up by various forms of state discipline and even legal prohibition. In this vein, it's important to ensure that we don't let philosophers like Nietzsche or Heidegger be seen as staples in right-wing thought, as their influence on philosophy in general is incredibly profound.